Why are 90% of the people with sexual problems, rape, offending, in prison who are male? Because women don't have testosterone. They're not driven in the same ways as men are around sexuality. Why don't we have a huge Me Too movement for men? We have a small one because men are aggressive and we are more the aggressors.
You were talking about intimacy earlier, and so I have a question on that. A lot of people, they think that intimacy and sex is the same thing. What's the difference between intimacy? Because I can tell you that before I got clean and sober, I didn't have intimate relationships. And the first real intimate relationship I ever had was with my sponsor. And that was when I learned intimacy, and it's not sex. So let me hear you.
But it happened.
What was that?
But it happened for you and this person, and you didn't have sex.
Right.
So how do you achieve it? What is it? Is that what you're asking? What is it? So this is a great question.
What's the difference between intimacy and sex?
So intimacy has to do with a connection to other people that may or may not involve sex. Intimacy, sexual intimacy is one form of intimacy, but it's not the only one. And it's certainly, actually, there are a lot more that are just as meaningful. Intimacy is the experience of making yourself vulnerable and being known. So if I said to you, can I give you an example? Do you mind if I tell a little teeny story? I don't know how much time we have, but so I went to the doctor not too long ago. I had an elbow problem, never met the doctor before. And he knows I'm a sexologist and a therapist. I never met him before, but he said, do you mind if I ask you a question, while he was working on my elbow? And I was like, sure, go ahead. And he said, well, I'm 60 and my wife's 45 and I'm worried about performance. And do you have any thoughts? And he knew what I did for a living. And I thought, and he wasn't trying to use me or take advantage of me, like get all the information. He was just asking a question. And I thought, I really like this guy. I want to go back and see him again. And the reason is he had made himself vulnerable to me. He had talked about something that was intimate, sexuality with his wife. He turned to me in a very innocent way, asking for support. And I felt closer to him because he had made himself vulnerable. So this is the opposite of what most people think. In group therapy, like, well, what if I say this? They're all going to hate me. The reality is, if you say something that's very meaningful about yourself, and even something that's hard to say, most people will move toward you. And that means you're building intimacy. So if I reveal to you stuff the friends create intimacy by talking about their shared issues. And, the person I'm intimate with, they don't abandon me. They don't leave me. They support me in learning more about me, even if they don't like what they're hearing. And so sexual intimacy is one form of intimacy, but really intimacy is about being known and the willingness to make yourself vulnerable to risk that another person will support you, let you in, not judge you. But you have to take that risk of opening up to that person, and that's where the intimacy starts. By the way, this is how you learn if someone's a friend or someone to date, because if they respond with, well, let me tell you about me, or, I don't agree with those, if someone doesn't bring you in when you're being vulnerable and intimate, they're probably not the right person for you to be friends with. You want that person to respond to you, wow, tell me more about that, or I'm sorry, that happened to me too, or they're engaged, and that's how intimacy is built.
How can a person learn intimacy?
Practice. How do you learn anything? I went to 12-step meetings because that was a a no-cost way for me to walk into a room and practice getting along with people. And I mean that because part of what happens in 12-step meetings, you go out for coffee after, you talk with people, you're a sponsor, so you become responsible to someone else, someone sponsors you, so you learn how to have a dependent relationship with someone as authority. You bring coffee every week, which means you learn accountability and structure. So there are all of these, people think 12-step programs are about following those steps and going to those meetings. To me, it's a much more sophisticated social and relationship learning experience. And what I love about 12-step meetings is I can walk up to you and say, hey, I'd like to be your friend, blah, blah, blah. And you can say, screw you, I don't like you. And then I can go on to the next person and say, gee, maybe, in other words, there's endless numbers of people to practice getting close to and getting to know. And I think those kinds of environments for addicts who tend to isolate is a really good place to practice.
Right. Yeah, and my experience was the same. I learned intimacy in 12-step meetings. I learned connection, real human connection. And I talk about how I moved to Arizona in 2006, and from 2006 to 2011, I was in my addiction, and I had a bunch of surface level relationships. But once I got clean and sober from 2011 until now, it's like my world has completely opened up because I've learned to truly connect with people. And that's at meetings, with a sponsor, with sponsees. That's even with people at the coffee shop, right? It's just people in passing learning. And I think because before getting clean and sober, it's all about Tim, and it's all
Right.
about
I
looking
wasn't
at
interested in you because it was
right,
about me.
right. So it's learning to pay attention, be aware, and listen, and be of service, and be vulnerable.
By the way, some people say, well, do I need to spend my life in meetings or I have to go? I would say that's, you might be going for a long period of time on a regular basis, but your life shouldn't be about that after the first year or so. You should be having those social and intimate experiences in recreation, in hobbies, with friends. The goal of recovery is not to go to meetings every day. It's to get out in the world
Right.
and practice the lessons that you learn. So if I learn to make more friends and be more at peace and be less reactive in a 12-step meeting, I need to then go out in the world and join a hiking group and start playing tennis with people and, getting engaged with people and using those skills in the real world.
That's been my experience as well. And I there was a study done, and I don't know where the study was done, and but the study basically showed that people that had multiple communities were happier.
Live
And
longer, healthier, all of it.
yeah, to your point. So it's like yoga, CrossFit, a hiking club, a reading club,
People.
a baking club. Like,
Well, I hate to tell you this, but human beings were never meant to live in an apartment on the 38th floor by themselves and not know their neighbors. That's just not for all of humanity. We've grown up in communities. It's auntie across the street and grandma who's upstairs, and we thrive in community. But our current lifestyle and way of living really forces us more into being separate and more isolated and more individual, especially in car driving cities. I don't know if you like in New York, you engage more people than you might in Atlanta, where you're more driving around. So the environments we live in also set us up for that. But addicts actively avoid connection, right? I'd rather use
mhm.
by myself at home than join some. We also devalue, I think, healthy engagement. Like, oh my God, who would want to go play softball at my age? I'd rather get hot. And we devalue the fun, if we even know what fun is.
So I think it's Dr. Gabor Mate that said addiction is the opposite of human connection. Do you agree
Yes.
with that?
Well, remember I said earlier, and you said that we're dealing with intimacy and attachment disorders. And I do believe that addicts are desperately seeking either A, to shut up their loneliness, shut up their longing for connection, and just drink it away. Um, or they're using it as a form of trying to make connection. But either way, it doesn't really work. Drugs and alcohol, sex, it doesn't, these are substitutes. So sex, for example, I can feel known, I can feel important. I'm in bed with this person, we're all over each other, but they're a stranger to me. I've never met them before. I've only known them a short time. I cannot be intimate with that person. I can have sex with them, but they
Right.
don't know me. They don't know who I am. So I'm only doing a physical act. I'm not doing an emotionally engaged physical act. I think one of the challenges, by the way, for sex addicts is when they put down all of that behavior, the porn, the acting out, the affairs, whatever, and then they try to be intimate with a real person. That's the challenge, is they know how to do things. They know how to drink, they know how to use, they know how to have sex with strangers, but actually being with real people and being close and intimate, we avoid that. We don't move toward it, we move away. And so,
Well, and
yeah, we don't get fed by the very thing that we need, which is emotional support,
right.
connection.
And relationships are about giving as opposed to taking, right? That's
Both.
what I think about when someone's with a sex worker or looking at porn or whatever. They're taking. They're seeking
Well, there's
fulfillment.
no, where it's more like putting yourself in a bubble.
Yeah.
You're not going to really, you're just in this little world of your own creation. And like I said, controllable. If I go see sex workers rather than being deeply intimate with my spouse, I can get, no sex worker is going to let me down. No prostitute is going to abandon me or hurt me. I have complete control over that relationship. I'm paying for it. But with a partner, someone I'm close to, they can really hurt me. And so I think turning to these more casual, I don't think I know, porn, sex workers, affairs, intensity, stripper, all that stuff, it's much easier for us to do that, sex addicts, than actually be close and vulnerable with someone that we care about. And so we often set up two lives where we have home and love and connection over here, and then we have this crazy sexual behavior here, and it's all compartmentalized. It's all compartmentalized, it's not connected, and we live multiple lives.
Right, right. It's believed that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Is that the same thing that's true of a sex addict?
Well, I don't think the addictions, I think all the addictions are the same, and they all come from the same place. You know, addictions are a longing for connection without the ability to do it or the fear of doing it. And by the way, when you go to 12-step programs, you are forced to connect. What do we do? I mean, think about it. What do we do with the most mentally ill or addicted when they are home going crazy? We take them out of there and we bring them into community. We put them in a hospital, we put them in a group, we take them to a meeting, we put them in a group. We bring them to connect with people. And we're literally saying this will replace that. If you work it, if you engage here, you'll have less of a need for that. What does the meeting really do that the alcohol doesn't do? It connects you. It makes you feel a part of something. And we are human. We long for that. But addiction tells us to stay separate and to do it on our own. And so, yes, I think all the addictions have the common thread of I'm fearful of intimacy. I'd rather take care of everything by myself because I don't trust that other people will help. And basically, I'm isolated in my own little box. And then when my deeper needs come up for connection or support, I don't turn to the people who could support me. I turn to the situations where I feel a sense of control and no one can let me down.
Right. So can a sex addict ever go back to having sexual behavior or sexual encounters like a normal person?
Well, let's first go back. I want to mention something more about your last question.
Okay.
If all addicts have an intimacy and an attachment disorder, which is my belief system, and you talked about Gabor Mate talking about that, a lot of people talking about the opposite of addiction is connection.
Right.
I assume that I actually have a brain problem. That addicts, many of us who should have grown up with a lot of focus on us, a lot of support for us, a lot of consistency, a lot of nurturing, we didn't get that for whatever reason. You know, I had crazy parents. They were not really available to me. Some people have alcoholic parents or parents who fight all the time, or whatever their caregivers do. That person does not learn to trust. They do not learn to rely on their caregivers. They learn maybe to reach out for help means I'm going to get abandoned. And so later in life, they don't turn to people for intimate love and support. They turn to something they can control, and addicts they can control alcohol, they can control drugs, they can control gambling, they can feel completely controlled in situations, by the way, where you and I would feel out of control. Trolling the street for sex workers would not make me feel safe, but a sex addict feels just powerful and great when they're out there doing that because they're feeling a sense of control and excitement.
To get a free copy of the 12-step guide that I created for you, click on the link in the description below.
Oh wait, no, that was your first question, and go back to the second one so I can answer that.
That was the first question. Right. So now the second question. So can a sex addict go back? They say that an alcoholic can never go back to drinking like a gentleman, right? So can a sex addict ever go back to having sex like a regular person?
Well, this is one of the challenges of having an addiction in an area that is a naturally occurring issue. So we all eat. We need to eat. Eating is a naturally occurring thing, and we need to do it. Sex is a naturally occurring experience. I don't want people to stop having sex. I want them to have healthy sex. So when you come to eating or food, abstinence is not stopping altogether. You wouldn't say to someone with an eating disorder, well, just stop eating and you'll be fine the rest of your life. Right. So these are what we call process addictions. They have to do with behaviors, not drinking and using. And you're right, you can stop gambling and have a happy life without any fantasy football, without any casinos, without any stock market. You know, you can stop spending and put yourself on a plan. So, but sex you want to keep having. Eating you want to keep doing. So we create what you might call a plan for sobriety, which is we write out what are the unhealthy behaviors that you need to stop doing. Seeing sex workers, calling exes, going out at night and not having a plan. You know, whatever the behaviors, we're going to set it down. We're going to establish as a sobriety, almost always sexual behavior. So I might look at someone a little too long. That's a warning sign. But if I go over to them and start talking to them and get them in bed, bottom line. I might eat a lovely meal, but if I go back for seconds or take a huge dessert, or then it's not. So with naturally occurring things, we set boundaries around the problem behavior, and then we encourage the healthy ones. And so, yes, I can have sex with my partner, but I'll tell you what, we have a little saying, which I love, that sex for sex addicts has to come from willingness, not from horniness. Sex for sex addicts has to come from willingness, not horniness, with an intimate partner. And what that means is, as a sex addict, I went out looking for the hottest, most exciting, and then it was intense, and I wanted you, and you wanted me, and it heart pounding, and there's a new butt, there's a new butt, and there's a new, and it's all exciting. And but when you live with someone for 15 years, that's not what sex is. You've seen that butt before. So how do you make intimate sexuality exciting and connected? And you don't do it by saying, oh, you're so hot, I can't wait to get in bed with you. You have to find other ways, and I would say be willing to find your way into sexual intimacy in ways that you haven't as a sex addict. And that takes working on your fear of intimacy, which most addicts I know have.
Right. Okay.
So yes, you can have sex, but not all sex.
Right. It's learning intimacy, learning connection, and it's not the high, right? So
right.
If you're chasing the high, and I guess maybe that could be a rule of thumb. If you're chasing the high, then you're kind of going into territory that could be a slippery slope.
Well, it's more like we're looking at the behaviors that have already caused problems. Like when I work with someone, I ask them what they want in life. Do they want a family? Do they want their marriage to work? Do they want work? And then I can say, well, what sexual behaviors are not supporting that? Well, I'm looking at porn 3 hours a day. It's really hard to get through school. Okay, well, this is your goal, but what you're doing is working against it. How do we figure out to move? Or I'm having sex with strangers, but I really want to have sex with a partner. Okay, how do we get you from here to there and not have you go back to the old behaviors? So that's kind of like it.
Gotcha. Is sex addiction genetic?
I think the capacity and vulnerability for addiction is genetic. And what I mean by that is some people come out of the womb and they're calm and they're fairly they don't make a lot of noise when they're baby, parents love them, and they're fairly calm and patient people. That's how they came out of the womb. That's their genetic piece. Other people come out anxious, more fearful, less connected. People are all different, and we're all different at the moment of birth all the way through. And so the person who had a depressed mother might have some genetic issues, had issues going through their family, like uncle was an alcoholic and grandma wasn't. When you're going to see those genetic predispositions, yes, you're going to see a predisposition toward either psychological disorders or addiction or both.
Gotcha. Is there a question that you've always wanted to be asked, but the interviewer never got around to it?
Well, one of them is, can women be sex addicts? Because we often talk about men, but we don't talk about women.
Right.
So there's one. And the answer is yes.
So can women be sex addicts?
Yes. I have run it. I think I opened one of the first treatment centers just for women with these issues. And interestingly, by the way, women will often bounce back and forth between food and sex. So they'll gain a whole bunch of weight when they're in a relationship, literally push that person away. And when they're single, they'll lose all the weight and run out there and pick up everyone they can find, and back and forth and back and forth. But I absolutely see this, everything from very compulsive behavior repetitively with strangers and in women, which we see in men more often, all the way to affair after affair. But I'm also sleeping with sex workers, but I'm also, it's just we don't see as many. Right. We don't see as many women getting in trouble for sexual problems as we do men. And there is a really good reason for that.
What's the reason?
I knew you were going to ask that. Testosterone. We are much more highly sexual, much more aggressive, much more competitive, much more, physical in those ways because we have testosterone and women don't. Why are 90% of the people with sexual problems, rape, offending, in prison who are male? Because women don't have testosterone. They're not driven in the same ways as men are around sexuality. Why don't we have a huge Me Too movement for men? We have a small one because men are aggressive and we are more the aggressors, and we are programmed that way. And then the chemicals. You ever notice how a 65-year-old man, most of them, are a little bit less apt to go, woo, look at you, baby, going down the street, That's not
Right.
just aging. That's the hormonal situation has changed. And I'm not so driven to look at that and touch that and talk to that. It's just not that important to me in the same way it did when I was 23.
Right. Now, my experience is that so women are more likely to have eating disorders and men are more likely to have um, sex addiction. So why do you think men are less likely to have an eating disorder?
Well, I think, and this is not research based, it's just how I would put it. I think men tend to act out. So men act out with sexual behavior, they act out with violence, they act out with stealing. Men tend to act outside of what's healthy for them out there in the world. Women tend to more act in. So they get depressed. They stop being functional. They eat and do things that make their life more insular, more not so much habit. So women more tend to have problems here. Men tend to have problems out there. Not that that can't be different, but women are soothing themselves and regulating their mood with food. They're not rushing out there for intensity with sex for the most part. And that just simply has to do with how we're built as men and women. But but yes, women are out there struggling, and especially with porn. Um, I don't know if you know this. I do a free group every week. I have for years on a. I've been running a support group for many years. I do it as service, about 6 years online, volunteer. And for 6 years, I have seen 50% of the people in that group women. 50%. Now I go to a 12-step meeting for sex addicts. It's 90% men.
Hmm.
But when you go online, you find that women feel safer in community online. Women don't necessarily want to go to a church basement on a rainy night and sit with 9 guys who have sex problems, but it's just
Right.
not. But they go online and I find a lot of women. So I think that they're finding we are going to see a lot more female all kinds of addicts showing up for help because they don't have to walk into a church basement at 9 o'clock at night. The internet has offered women a lot more opportunities to heal than they had before, in my opinion.
There's a treatment center in Tucson, and they have a program called intimacy disorder for intimacy. It's called intimacy disorders. It used to be sex addiction, but now it's intimacy disorders. And it's like women felt. My understanding is that women felt safer once it was called an intimacy disorder.
Hmm.
And is
Well,
that
think about this. If I'm a guy and I'm having a lot of sex, and I don't really tell people the bad parts, I just tell people the hot sex I'm having, I'm going to be called a stud. People are like, wow, that guy's cool. He gets laid all the time.
right?
But if I'm a woman and I'm out there having a lot of sex, I'm going to be called a slut. I'm going to be called a whore. And so women already intuitively know what people think about them if they're out there having a lot of sex. So it's much harder, by the way, speaking for a woman to come out and talk about it because she's not going to be the player. She's going to be the bad girl. And our culture already knows that, acknowledges it, accepts that. So I think there is an important reason why we look at women and men differently who have these issues for sure.
Right. How can people find support? And I know you already mentioned this earlier. How can people find support if they are struggling or if a loved one is struggling with sex addiction?
Well, there are endless support groups online. I mean, sex and relationship healing is one of them. But every 12-step program is online. Sex and Love Addicts, Sex Addicts Anonymous. Now, by the way, there are programs for porn, people with porn problems. There's Sex and Porn Addicts Anonymous. There's Porn Addicts Anonymous. So there's all of that. Um, and I want to say something else about porn. So let's go back to your question. Can you repeat that so I don't miss it?
How can people find support if they're struggling or if a loved one is struggling with sex addiction or porn addiction or anything around that?
Well, educate yourself. I mean, it's true that there's a lot of fake news online, but if you look for experts, and I mean, this is where you need to look. Look for the person who has the PhD. Look for the person who has the educational experience. Look for the drug and alcohol counselor. Look for the people who know what they're doing and read and learn. Also, YouTube, I think, is a great place to
Mhm.
have professionals talk to you and learn from you and all that kind of stuff. Um, we offer online courses where people can learn how to work on this stuff. I just think of the internet now, there's so many opportunities. Really, if you just, there's whole communities for men with porn problems, like with thousands of people in there going every week trying to change their behavior. So the gift of the internet in part is that there's so many places you can go and so many places to learn. It's funny. I just want to say this silly little thing. I mean, it's so silly, but you and I often recommend a book for someone to read. Like I think this would be helpful if you read this book, Addicts and Partners. I was talking to someone today and I realized I can tell them to get it right this minute. And by the time we're done with this conversation, they'll have the book in their hand. And little things like that have changed my world in ways that really help people. So anyway, I'm a huge fan of accessing things online. Education is the best way to start.
Where can people find you? How can they find you?
Well, I'm not hard to find. If you type in Dr. Rob Weiss, you will find, or type in Rob Weiss and sex, and you will find, you don't need to go much further than that. If you want to write me a note, I'm rob@seekingintegrity.com. The podcast is sexandrelationshiphealing.com. The treatment center is Seeking Integrity. And our free website for support is sexandrelationshiphealing.com. So there are lots of ways to find me. And you will find me on Digital Intervention, probably in January. Yeah, I think for parents out there who have kids who are really struggling with social media and the internet, I think digital intervention stuff is actually going to be very helpful.
Dr. Rob, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you. I learned a lot. And I hope our listeners learned a lot as well.
And I love being sober. So thank you for naming it that, and thank you for inviting me in.
If you got value from this video, if you heard what you needed to hear, be sure to like it. Comment if you've got a question or you have something to say. Subscribe to the channel. Camelback Recovery provides treatment services for people struggling with mental health, mental illness, addiction, alcoholism, whatever it may be. So if you or a loved one is struggling and you need some guidance and you need some direction, reach out to us. Our contact information is down below, or you can go to our website, camelbackrecovery.com, whether it be detox, inpatient treatment, sober living, recovery coaching, sober companion services, whatever it may be. Like I said, we can either help you or make sure that you get sent in the right direction. We help people all over the country, all over the world for that matter. I'll see you on the next video.